Welcome back everybody to our journey into Kamigawa, the set releasing on the 18th of February, where we are at 2 days out from being able to see the final entirety of this set. So let's get into it. First, caffeine. The first card, we're going to start with white as always and probably break this up into two parts. We've got a lot to go over. First one is Seven Tail Mentor, a 4 mana Fox Samurai, 2 power, 3 toughness. Whenever this card enters the battlefield or dies, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or vehicle that you control. That's a really good effect. It's a 4 mana card though, which does make this later in the game kind of card. That means if I want to put it in my Samurai Spirit deck, that means that I'd want on turn 4 to give 1/+1 counter to something, and then I kind of want this card to die as quickly as possible and modify something else. So I think in my deck, this card maybe ends up being a bit too slow. Overall, just looking at this card though, I think I can see it being run. It's just for that mana cost of 4 mana, it's really tough to be excited to put that into a deck. So if you do run it, I think it's just because you need more Samurai, not so much because this card is that good. So overall too slow, but maybe just okay enough. And that's just because it's a Samurai, maybe just okay enough to put into the deck to modify other Samurai. Because you certainly don't mind attacking alone with this card to activate other effects that when a warrior or samurai attacks alone, this cool thing happens. You don't mind attacking alone with this card because you also want it to be blocked and die. So in that way, it does incentivize this card being that one that's attacking by itself. Alright, our last card for the whites for today is When We Were Young. So it's a 4 mana instant, up to 2 target creatures each get +2/+2 until the end of the turn. And if you control an artifact and an enchantment, then those creatures would also gain lifelink until the end of the turn. So without ensuring that you're getting the artifact and enchantment on your board, the effect would be a 4 mana +2/+2 to up to 2 creatures. So 4 mana +4/+4 value, that's okay. It may be just okay enough. Those aren't counters, so they're not permanent. So as such, don't count as modifications. So that, especially with the set, big on modifying your cards, without this being an enchantment aura, without this being an equipment, and without this handing out any counters of any kind, that does make just +2/+2 until the end of the turn a lot less of a card you'd want to run. But it has an additional effect. If you can get an artifact and enchantment out, giving each of those 2 creatures +2/+2 life and lifelink, that may make this card okay just enough, especially if you're running it in a Samurai I'm swarming the board effect sort of deck. The artifacts you'd be running would probably be vehicles, and the enchantments are the easy ones. Sagas, there's a ton of them in here, not to mention white runs a lot of enchantments. So I think that this card isn't terrible, but it's just hard for me to picture this card being run in a deck here. So I'm going to say it's too slow and it doesn't quite fit the decks that it needs to go into. And without it handing out any +1/+1 counters, I think that's what really makes this card not good enough to run. So overall, too slow. But if you do run it in a deck, it's more because I haven't pulled the cards I really want for this deck yet, and this does help it. So I'm going to run it until I can replace it. It's not a bad interim card. We haven't seen a lot of cards that I've at least been able to see that are just in between, really awesome and not so good. This card is not a great card. It's one of the ones that you maybe run like, okay, I need to pad up my deck, need 60 cards, haven't quite gotten the stuff I want out of packs yet, and I don't want to get online and specifically buy them until I kind of understand what deck is better for me to build. I think this is a good interim card, and you can run this in almost any white deck if you're using it to pad up. I could even run it in my Spirit green-white deck if I wanted to until I got all the stuff that I wanted. So okay interim card, but overall, in terms of strategy, this is just too slow of a card to be excited to run in any deck. That moves us to our blue cards. The first one being Acquisition Octopus. It is a 3 mana equipment creature that also is an artifact. It is a 2 power, 2 toughness card that whenever this card or an equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card, and its effect to reconfigure costs 2 mana. So for 3 mana to play this card out, it's a 2/2, and if you don't really want to equip it right away, this card is somewhat useful on its own, just because if you can deal some damage just with this creature, then you do get to draw a card, and that's not bad. And equipping it to another creature is good because it protects that octopus. It turns it into a artifact equipment and allows the effect to be put onto a creature. So if that creature were to be destroyed, you still get this effect if you want to. So you can have the creature survive that combat. So, okay, well, the thing it was equipped to is dead, but I think I can still hit you for 2 on my next turn. If you can pull something like that off, drawing a card in a blue deck is always great, especially when you're scrying, when you know what's on top of your deck. You're setting the top of your deck up in such a way that it's going to be a good draw. That just increases the value of any card that has the effective card draw, because it's not just draw a random card. For the most part in a blue deck, it's draw that card that you have on top of your deck that you really want because you know exactly what it is. So that makes this card a lot better. So what do you run it in though? It's an octopus, so you maybe run it in one of those old, not old school, but one of those older decks where it's octopus, leviathan, serpents, krakens. I would certainly see that being run in those decks. They need more low value cards anyways. They have a lot of high mana cards. But aside from a deck like that, I don't think this fits in. Unless you want to count it as an artifact. It does synergize well with the cards that say return an artifact from your graveyard. It does well with anything that says you have an artifact and an enchantment. This would count as an artifact. So it does synergize with cards. I don't know if it's good enough to put into your deck on just the synergizing with artifact cards just yet. So good card. Maybe you even run it for the card draw, but it also could be too slow. My opinion is a bit divided on this card because I love blue cards, but for the most part, 3 mana, you usually want to draw more than 1 card, and it's not even a guaranteed card draw. So I'm going to err on the side of it's too slow of a card, but I could see it being run either way. Our next card is Anchor to Reality. It is a 4 mana sorcery. As an additional cost to casting this spell, you must sacrifice an artifact or creature, and this would allow you to search your library for an equipment or vehicle card. Put that card onto the battlefield and then shuffle, and if the mana value of that card was less than the sacrifice permanent its mana value, you can scry too. I love to scry for blue deck. 4 mana scry is not good, but it's 4 mana, sacrifice something on your side of the board and replace it with something better. It's a guaranteed upgrade to whatever you already have on the board. That makes this card pretty good. And you're searching your library for an artifact or a creature, so an equipment or a creature. So this card could be really good. I think it is probably good. But you've got to run it in a vehicle deck for this to be really good. That's what I think. Could you run it with artifact creatures in your deck so you can pull out other artifact creatures that you like? Yeah, you could. And it may be good even then. But I think this is better for the vehicles. The vehicles tend to have a higher mana cost, tend to have... You don't really want to pay the mana for them because you want to pay mana for the creatures to pilot them. So I think you're pulling out a vehicle. I think you're maybe sacrificing an artifact creature, low cost one, maybe that octopus, and you're trading it out with something better, probably a vehicle. So if you run this in a vehicle deck, this is a good card. If you run it in a deck that has artifact cards you like or artifact creature cards, this could still be good. I don't think you run a lot of copies of this in that case, but I do think in a vehicle deck you maybe run 2, maybe even 3 copies of this card, because it is a guaranteed pull out of your deck. This card you need right now, and for 4 mana, that's worth it, even if you have to sacrifice one of your creatures or artifacts. Alright, our next one is Discover the Impossible, a 3 mana instant that allows you to look at the top 5 cards of your library, exile one of them face down, put the rest of them on the bottom of your library in a random order, and it allows you to cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost so long as it's an instant spell with a mana value of 2 or less. And if you do not do that, then you at least get to put it in your hand. So, worst case scenario is a 3 mana, look at the top 5 cards of your library, draw 1, put the other 4 in the bottom of your library in a random order. Best case scenario is a 3 mana, search the top 5 cards of your library for an instant that you want to cast right now, and do that, and put the other 4 cards in the bottom of your library in a random order. I mean, this is a good card. I think this is a good enough card to run, especially with being able to have a guaranteed card draw. I mean, even if I'm not casting the card, you've exiled the card face down, which means your opponent doesn't get to know what it is. So unless you choose to cast it, you can just put it in your hand. For 3 mana, that's not bad. Most of the time for a blue deck, 3 mana draws you 2 cards. So for 3 mana, look at the top 5. You only get to draw 1, but it's the one you want. I think that makes this worth it. In a blue deck, it's better to have guaranteed, I know what I'm going to draw. And if you haven't had that yet, then this is a good card to have. Maybe you don't run a lot of copies of this card, maybe 1 or 2, but in any blue deck, this is a good card to run. I like to see more blue cards that allow you to do stuff like that. It just helps speed them up. So that moves us to our Moonsnare Specialist. A 4 mana human ninja, is a 2/2. Its ninjutsu ability is 3 mana. Whenever this enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand. For 3 mana, that's worth it. Usually you see that with 2 mana, but for an extra mana, you're getting a 2/2 on the board who's guaranteed dealt damage as long as you use this ninjutsu. This is a good ninja to run, and I definitely see this being run in a ninja deck, which, trying to remember, I haven't been talking a lot about the ninja deck colors yet, but I think it's probably blue-black. That's what I'm guessing. I think it's blue-black. We've seen ninja synergy with black. We've seen a lot of ninja synergy with blue. We've seen some with white and green, but it's felt mostly because, well, we're releasing a ninja set, so we should do that, to me. The multicolors are the only ones that kind of throw a wrench into my idea about what color decks you're doing, but I think you're running a blue-black deck, and if you don't run any multicolored cards, you don't run any multicolored cards, but I think it's blue-black. And this card would fit really well in it. Returning a creature card from your opponent's side of the board to their hand, just for this entering the battlefield. It doesn't even have to be dealing combat damage, but you want it to. So for 3 mana, return 1 to their hand. And then don't forget, you can ninjutsu with another card and pull it right back up into your hand. I love it. It's just a really good card, so you definitely run it in every ninja deck. Also should say, evaluating it by itself, you don't put this in any other deck but a ninja deck. It really is worth it because that ninjutsu ability, and so if you're not running it with other ninjas so you can ninjutsu it back to your hand also, it makes this card a lot less awesome. It's okay, 3 mana, return 1 creature on your opponent's side of the board to their hand, and you get a 2/2 on the board. That's not bad. It's just a lot better if you can do that again. So always being able to do that establishes a threat that your opponent has to answer for, and unless they answer it while it's still on your side of the board on their next turn before you ninjutsu it back to your hand, then it makes it to where now, unless they can make you discard, which is only really a black deck sort of thing, then they won't have an answer for it until you play it again. So I like that. And lastly, that brings us to our Replication Specialist, a 5 mana, another Moonfolk, 3/4 with flying. Whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 mana, and if you do, you create a token that's a copy of that artifact. This is a good way to play a vehicle and get another vehicle out. I like that. Especially with a lot of cards that seem to be able to pilot your vehicles almost on their own. You can, for every creature you have a vehicle. So this is good to be able to quickly get more vehicles out. So that way you're attacking with bigger vehicles that are okay if they get destroyed because they're only artifact creatures when they're crewed. I think this ends up being really good. And you run this in your vehicle deck. I think vehicle deck is what I say it was. Probably mono red with goblins, and I think it's probably white red with the samurai. But we've seen another blue card that did really well with vehicles. Maybe this one makes that deck good enough to run. It certainly makes it better. I just don't think it makes it good enough to run, but maybe it does, and you run this in it. I will say if you run a vehicle deck that has blue in it, you certainly run this card. And that is it for the blue cards. And that moves us into our black cards. The first one we're going to talk about is the Blade of the Oni. 2 mana, 3/1. It is an artifact creature who can equip, and it counts as a demon. So on its own, it's a 3/1 with menace. If you reconfigure this card onto a creature for 4 mana, then that creature will have base power and toughness of 5/5. It will have menace, and will be a black demon in addition to its other colors and types. A 2 mana 3/1 with menace isn't good, so you have to run this and equip it, which now increases that mana cost in my head from 2 to 6. 6 mana, turn one of your little creatures into a 5/5 with menace. It being black in addition to other stuff, I mean, that's fine. I think for 6 mana, 5/5 menace, that's probably worth it. I'd prefer to be 5, but this is probably one of the first equipments that I would be excited about. Makes sense it would be a mythic rare. I love this card. So, what do I run it in? I think you run this in... I think you run it in a rat or ninja deck. I don't think you run this with vehicles, which is fine. I don't think black has anything to do really with vehicles right now. So I think you run this in any of the 2 decks that they've been trying to build black for. So it fits well with what they were trying to do. It's the right color. It does the right stuff. It has about the right mana cost. So I'm glad to finally be happy about an artifact equipment, because these things have been just too darn slow for me. So I like it. Our next card is the Dockside Chef. For 1 mana, it is a 1/2 human citizen enchantment creature, where 2 mana you can sacrifice an artifact or creature to draw a card. A lot of the black cards that allow you to draw have a cost to them, and I always feel like the cost is too high, and I think this is another situation where it's nice to have card draw, but the problem with this card, and the problem with a lot of black cards that let you draw, is they tend to let you either scry, or they let you draw if you sacrifice a creature. So here, you pay 1 mana to get a 1/2 out, who you're already not really excited about. Then you pay 2 mana to sacrifice an artifact or creature you have to let you draw 1 card. And in my head, that's 1 mana, play a 1/2 you don't care about. So it's 3 mana, sacrifice a creature or artifact to draw a card, which all that first card does, by the way, is replace the card you just played. You would have drawn that card instead of this one. So you need 2 cards for this to be a worthwhile card, because that 1/2 isn't doing anything. It doesn't synergize with anything. It's an enchantment, so you can pull it from your graveyard. Sure, it counts as enchantments on the board, but that's not worth it in my head. I think this is for it to be worth it, a 5 mana, draw 2 cards, sacrifice 2 artifacts and or creatures. Yeah, I don't think that this card is good. And I always feel that way about the black draw cards. They always have this silly cost. If I just rather run a blue deck if I'm going to have desperate draw card moves in a black deck. I'd just rather run blue. Maybe blue-black. I mean, that combo has been around for a long time, and it lets you do the drawing that you need without the sacrificing creatures or paying life points or whatever. So that's my take on this. I don't think it's a good card. I don't think it's slow. I just don't think it's good. All right. The next card is Gravelighter. A 3 mana 2/2 spirit with flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and if a creature died this turn... No. It is a 2/2 with flying that whenever it enters the battlefield, you draw a card only if a creature died this turn. Otherwise, each player sacrifices a creature. I think this is probably a good card. It's weird that it's a spirit, because I don't see black cards really fitting a whole lot into spirit decks right now. But a 3 mana 2/2 flying, you want it to be a 2 mana card for just that. But for that extra mana, you get to draw a card if you played it after a creature died. But if you wanted to, you could play it and immediately force someone else to sacrifice a creature. You can sacrifice a creature. It could be the one you just played. It could be one of your rats or something that you have. I think this is a good enough card to run in a black deck. It fits black in general. I'm used to making opponents sacrifice with black decks. Usually those are like kicker effects. So it's nice to just see that included in a mana cost. And you get a flying out of it. So it's definitely a good card. And it's worth it for the mana you're paying for it. It doesn't synergize a whole lot into black decks. But even without that synergy, you may consider running it just because the effect is good enough for that mana cost. Alright, next. Okay, I'm going to attempt to pronounce this card correctly. It's Mukotai Ambusher. It's a 4 mana 3/2. It's a rat ninja artifact creature where it has a 2 mana ninjutsu ability, and this creature has lifelink. So you're really wanting to pay it for ninjutsu. A 4 mana 3/2 with lifelink isn't good. But a 2 mana, guaranteed to deal damage this turn, return the creature that wasn't blocked to your hand, 3/2 is lifelink, is significantly better. So this is a really good card, and it's a rat card, and it's an artifact card, and it's a ninja card. So much synergy. Because there's a lot of cards that are running in black right now that if you have an artifact and enchantment on your side of the board, such and such happens. This fits really well with that. So this is a must run in a ninja deck, and it fits really well with the color that they're trying to go for. So this is perfect. The final card we're going to talk about for the black cards that have been sneak peek today is Okiba Salvage. It is a 5 mana sorcery. Return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then put 2 +1/+1 counters on that permanent if you control an artifact or enchantment. With how many artifacts you're getting and how many enchantments we're getting, that fit really well in black decks, and with me thinking you're probably running a blue-black ninja deck anyways, blue running a lot of enchantments and artifact creatures as well, I think this is an easy run. I don't think you're pulling out a vehicle, but I do think you're pulling out a creature. It's nice to pull out something that you can ninjutsu back into your hand. So I think this is a good card. I just wish it wasn't 5 mana, but you're immediately putting 2 +1/+1 counters on that creature, I think. I think it's for sure happening. I don't even think it's really something you have to plan around to set up properly. I think it just happens by turn 5. I mean, you're paying 5 mana for this card, so you're at least waiting 5 turns to play this card. By the time you've had a creature that died that you really want to bring back, I think it's already happened. I don't think it's something you need to set up or plan around. So for 5 mana, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and immediately give it 2 +1/+1 counters. I think that is a good card. Keep in mind though, if you ninjutsu that card back up to your hand, those counters do go away. They don't get to keep it when it goes to your hand. That's not how counters work. So in that sense, it doesn't incentivize you to want to return to your hand unless it has an ability that when it enters the battlefield or something else happens that combos well with ninjutsu, that you'd want to do it. So maybe it is a bit too slow to run in a ninja deck, but maybe it's not. So I could see it going either way. With that high mana cost, it does make it a lot more of an iffy card. And it's a sorcery, so it must be played on your turn. So you're not using it to pull out a blocker. So I could see it going either way on this card. It's a tough call. I'm going to say it's probably too slow, and if you do run it, it's just 1. Again, this one is another card that I think would be an okay padding for your deck until you can pull the better cards from your packs that you're trying to open. Alright, and that moves us over to red cards. Not a lot of red cards to go over today. The first one is Kami of Industry, a 5 mana 3/6. It is a spirit that whenever it enters the battlefield, return target artifact card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it would gain haste, but you do sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. For 5 mana, that's a bit lackluster to me. I think you're wanting a 5 mana, even with that effect, a 5 mana 4/6 at the least here, I think would be fair. Because you want this to stay on the board, and that's why they gave it all toughness. But you don't want it to be entirely useless after the effect has already happened. And it is pretty much useless after the effect has happened. So I think this card is too slow to run, especially since red, I think, is primarily going to be focused on the vehicles, the artifact vehicles. So I think this ends up being a little too slow, and you don't really run it. Maybe you use this card to pilot other vehicles if you do run it in, but it being a spirit doesn't combo well with the artifact synergy, with the enchantment synergy, or with the goblins, or with a samurai if you're doing the red-white vehicle deck. So I think it is too slow. And our final red card for today is Reinforced Ronin, a 1 mana artifact creature human samurai, is a 2/2 with haste. At the beginning of your end step, you return this card to your hand. It has a channel ability for 2 mana, you discard this card, and you draw a card. And that's really good because you're constantly returning this back up to your hand. So it's just 1 mana, attack, you play an attack with this card, return it back to your hand. I think that's really cute. I like this card, and I definitely think it runs in the vehicle samurai deck. I think it's red, white, samurai, maybe some goblins, certainly goblin samurais. I think this is a must run in that deck, and at the point where this card stops being useful to you and it's sitting in your hand, and you don't want to play it and attack with it, pay 2 mana, discard it, draw a card you actually wanted. And that's really good because, yes, it does just replace itself, but you've gotten a lot of use out of this card, and then it replaces itself. Makes it far better in value with you drawing 1 card. And that does it for the red cards. This is where we're going to cut up the video for part 1. So feel free to drop down a comment down below. Talk about any of the cards I've already talked about. Tune in for part 2, which we'll be posting shortly. Like and subscribe. See you next time.